Imagine this. You're the founding father of a brand new nation. You've completely altered world history, literally redrawn the global map, and achieved what pretty much everyone thought was absolutely impossible. But behind your impeccably tailored suits and this completely unyielding public persona, you're hiding a fatal, closely guarded secret. A secret so massive it could have unraveled the whole shebang. Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the extraordinary life, the iron will, and the profound legacy of Quaid Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Here's how we're going to piece together this incredible geopolitical puzzle today. We'll start with his early years in London, then look at the Pakistan movement, the 1944 talks with Gandhi, the birth of Pakistan, his vision for a nation, and finally, his final days in Ziyarat. Let's get into it.
19. For 19 years, Muhammad Ali Jinnah secretly battled tuberculosis. 19 years! It was a secret kept so profoundly hidden, known only to his sister and just a tiny handful of others, that it literally shaped the timeline of the modern world. I mean, Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy of India, actually claimed later on that if this fatal secret had been known, it might have entirely prevented or at least delayed the partition of India. It's just this staggering, deeply human element hiding right behind a monumental historical event.
Okay, moving on to Section 1. Early years and London.
To really understand how this unstoppable force was forged, we have to look at his origins. Jinnah was born in Karachi in 1876, and get this, he was a fragile, seriously underweight boy. So much so that his mother took him to doctors and shrines, constantly worrying about his health. Yet his internal drive? Absolutely immense. At just 16 years old, in 1892, he packed up and left for London. By 19, he had already completed his law degree, becoming the youngest student to ever do so at Lincoln's Inn. But this crazy rapid ascent came with a huge personal cost. During those 3.5 years in London, he got the tragic news of both his beloved mother passing away and his first wife, Emma, who he had just married right before leaving. So, what was driving him? Well, there's this really touching childhood anecdote. A young Jinnah was found studying late into the night, just reading by the dim light of a lantern. And when his aunt told him, go to sleep, he simply replied that he had to work hard to become a great man. That sheer determination, it was hardwired into him from day one. And here's a wild detail. While in London, Jinnah practically lived at the theater and developed this deep, romantic desire to become a Shakespearean actor. Actually, he specifically wanted to play Romeo. He even wrote to his father about joining a theater company. His father's response? A strict, furious refusal, basically telling him not to betray the family and to focus on his law studies. Jinnah actually yielded to his father. He abandoned the stage and instead adopted that impeccably dressed, highly disciplined, intensely focused legal persona we all know him for today. And historically speaking, it's said that was the very last time he ever backed down from an ambition. Which brings us to Section 2, the Pakistan movement. Jinnah's political evolution ultimately led him to champion what's known as the two-nation theory. Now, to look at the history impartially here, we need to understand the core of his argument. He essentially asserted that Hindus and Muslims in the subcontinent weren't just majority and minority communities living together, but actually two entirely distinct nations. Different customs, different histories, different social fabrics. He famously compared the situation to the distinct nations of the Americas. This doctrine was eventually formalized in the 1940 Lahore Resolution, which really became the bedrock demand for an independent Muslim state.
All right, Section 3. 1944 Talks with Gandhi.
In September 1944, this fascinating clash of brilliant minds took place at Jinnah's house in Bombay. But they reached a total deadlock. Why? Because they were operating on completely parallel courses. Jinnah came to the table insisting he was the sole representative of the Muslims and demanded that the principle of partition be accepted before fighting for independence. Gandhi, on the flip side, stated he was acting purely in a personal capacity, not on behalf of the Congress, and he fundamentally believed that a united independence had to be achieved before they could even discuss partition. Honestly, they were practically speaking two entirely different political languages.
During these talks, Gandhi endorsed what was called the Rajaji formula. Let's break down the actual mechanics of what was on the table here. Step 1, the Muslim League joins a provisional government. Step 2, after the war, they demarcate Muslim-majority districts. Step 3, hold a plebiscite, basically a popular vote, involving all residents of those areas to decide on separation. But here's the crucial takeaway. Jinnah's reaction. He firmly, absolutely rejected it. He famously called it a parody and negation of Pakistan. He just had this deep distrust of a formula that included a plebiscite where non-Muslim residents would be involved in voting for a Muslim state, and he felt the terms were way too vague. So the 18-day summit ended without any agreement, which really just solidified that deep historical divide.
Now for Section 4, the birth of Pakistan.
Despite the deadlocks and his rapidly failing health behind the scenes, his willpower ultimately prevailed. The new Constituent Assembly was this vibrant, remarkably diverse, historic gathering. You had Liaquat Ali Khan moving the resolution for the new national flag. Jogendranath Mandal was there, representing the Untouchables. Begum Shaista-i-Gramula attended as the sole woman member of the assembly. And Lord Mountbatten, on literally his very last day as viceroy, formally inaugurated the Dominion. It was in this room that Jinnah took his oath of allegiance as the first Governor-General of Pakistan. His life's work officially fulfilled.
Section 5. Vision for a Nation.
So what exactly was his blueprint for this brand new state? Drawing directly from his really monumental speech to the Constituent Assembly on August 11, 1947, his priorities were fiercely pragmatic. He wasn't just up there speaking in lofty, abstract ideals. He outlined immediate, strict duties for the new government. Duty number 1, maintain law and order to protect the life, property, and religious beliefs of the subjects. But notice the intense language he used next. He demanded the state crush bribery and corruption with an iron hand and completely eradicate black marketing and nepotism, which he straight up called a poison. He had zero tolerance for anything that would weaken the foundation of the state.
And he outlined an explicit, undeniable guarantee of religious freedom. He stated unequivocally that religion, caste, or creed had absolutely nothing to do with the business of the state. He envisioned this ultimate ideal where, under the law, personal faith remained a totally private matter, but in the political realm, everyone possessed impartial, equal citizenship. He promised to be guided by justice and complete impartiality, without any prejudice or favoritism.
Finally, Section 6, Final Days in Ziyaret.
We really have to contrast that grand, triumphant vision of independence with the quiet, pretty isolating reality of his final months, 70. Jinnah spent his final 70 days retreating to the crisp, dry air of the Ziyaret residency. Located a few hours from Quetta, this 1892 British colonial sanatorium was nestled way up in a valley surrounded by an ancient 5,000-year-old juniper forest. It was a beautiful, deeply quiet place meant to help him recuperate from the immense damage his relentless political struggle had done to his frail body.
But you know what? Even there, he simply could not stop. His personal assistant shared this incredibly poignant detail. Every single day, heavy black dispatch boxes stamped with MAJ in gold would arrive from Karachi. Even as his body completely failed him, his slim hands were relentlessly busy. He was still working through official papers, sorting out the affairs of the new nation on a small table set up right on the lawn. He worked almost until the very last day, maintaining this unforgettable, perpetual smile despite his illness.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. How different would the map of the world look today if the immense physical cost of his unyielding willpower had been known to his political rivals? It is just a massive testament to the sheer force of one man's determination, because behind the historical monuments, the speeches, and those immaculate suits was an exhausted, fiercely driven individual who fought a silent, daily battle within himself just to secure a homeland for millions. It's a fascinating reminder of the profound human struggle that shapes our world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history behind the headlines.